Okay, now let's run the chi-square test of independence. It's also called the test of association as well, and it's now looking at the relationship between two categorical variables. So the goodness of this just has one categorical variable. The test of independence has two categorical variables, and we want to see the relationship between those two variables. So again, the null hypothesis is basically the same, that the observed frequencies match the expected frequencies, the alternative being that they don't match. So we're going to use an example data set from the LSJ data set. So we'll open data library, and we want I actually don't know how to pronounce this, but it's from a TV show apparently. Chapek? I don't know. No, I think it's hypothetical. Yeah, I think it's a hypothetical thing. We're going to call it Chapek. In this case, we have how many people? 180 participants, I should say, because I won't say people because half of them are robots, or I'm not sure about half. We'll find out. Some are robots, some are human, and then we are asking them, let's see, whether you prefer puppies, flowers, or large, properly formatted data files. So our null hypothesis is that robots and humans will not differ in their choice of preference in these three categories. The alternative is that they would differ. You might have a particular hypothesis there, but in general, the alternative is that they would have different preferences. Okay, so we've looked at our data, we've got our species, our choice. Now let's really look at those frequencies. So we'll go exploration descriptives. We're going to put both of these variables over here, and we'll ask for frequency tables. And we look and see we have about half and half of robots and humans, but it's not perfectly half and half. That's fine. And then what their choices are. So a few chose puppies, more chose flowers, and a lot of participants, there we go, chose data. But we want to see, does species differ by their choice? So for that, we're going to run our chi-square test of independence. Okay, so first, our test of independence has two assumptions. One, that the expected frequencies are sufficiently large. We'll check that in a second. And the second, that the data are independent, meaning one participant is only found in one of the cells of the crosstabs of species versus choice, so that they're not making multiple choices, they're just making one choice, and there's just one participant per row, basically. If you violate this assumption, you might use the McNamara test, which I'll cover in a next video, but in general, this meets that assumption. We'll check the frequencies one in a second, because each participant only chose one of the three options. They weren't in the data set two or more times. So we meet that assumption. So let's run the test so that we can check that assumption of expected frequencies. We go to the frequencies analysis and go to the independent samples. Notice it calls it the test of association instead of the test of independence. That's fine. So independent samples. You can choose to put species and choice on either rows or columns. It really doesn't matter. As I mentioned in the textbook, I tend to like putting things where there's more categories into the rows and things with fewer categories into columns. So there's fewer species, so I'm going to move species into columns and choice into rows. And just note that it makes it for a longer table as opposed to a wider table. I only do that for when I have like a lot of data, like a lot of categories, because then it just fits nicer into a portrait style table or paper. So it's just preferential. It really doesn't matter. Actually, we could just do that right here. Like what would it look like? Let's see, what is the opposite? Species and choice. Notice our chi-square test is exactly the same. 10.72, 0.005, go back. 10.72, 0.005. So it doesn't make any difference. Okay, before we interpret all of that, let's check our expected frequencies. So we need to go to, let's see, where do I find it? I think cells, yep, expected counts. And we look at our expected 13, 14, 20, 22, 52, 56, 87, 93. Everything looks good, sufficiently large, we meet that assumption as well. So we've met both of our assumptions for the chi-square test of independence. Okay, now we have possibilities of changing our hypotheses here. I'm not going to lie, I don't think this was here when I first created this. I'm not sure what this would do, because what if we have multiple groups? I'm not sure how this works. This might only be if we have 2 categories per. We're going to ignore this. You can ask for some measures of effect size here. So we can ask for phi in Kramer's V. We won't get phi because it has to be the same number of levels per variable, but it's different this time. This is a 2 by 3, 2 in species, 3 by choice, and so it won't give us a phi coefficient, but it can give us a Kramer's V as a measure of effect size. We don't have any ordinal variables here, but you can get some ordinal effect sizes as well. You have some comparative measures. If you're doing a 2 by 2, we're not doing a 2 by 2, so you ignore all of this. And then there's some tests and corrections you can make, which I'll talk about in a minute. So you can get the observed and expected counts. You can also get the percentages. So I could ask for row percentages and column percentages. So for example, within the robot species, robots tend to endorse the data more than the flower, more than the puppy. And then we see that for humans, data more and puppy and flower pretty evenly. So that's how you would interpret column, right? Notice how they add up to 100%. So you know that the column, the row would add up to 100% within the row. So you might use both depending on how you're trying to interpret the results, the overall results. So let's overall interpret everything. First, the chi-square test. We have our chi-square value. We have our degrees of freedom. In this case, oh my goodness, I always forget how to do this. I think it's number of categories in the first one minus 1. So that'd be 2 minus 1 is 1. Number of categories in the second one minus 1. So that's 3 minus 1, which is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. That's why our degrees of freedom is 2. Overall, n is 180. P-value is less than our typical alpha of 0.05, and so it is statistically significant. So we would say that there is a difference in what choice each species has. Okay, let me pull up how I've written this. Where'd you go? There you go. So we can write it up something like this. Pearson's chi-square test of independence showed a significant association between species and choice. Then I provide the chi-square statistics. Chi-square degrees of freedom 2 equals 10.72, comma p equals 0.005. Kramer's V, our measure of effect size, equals 0.24. And then I interpret it. Robots appear to be more likely to say they prefer flowers, and humans appear to be more likely to say they prefer data. Robots and humans appear to be equally likely to prefer puppies. So let's look at that in relation to our data. Move this over a little bit. Okay, so robots appear to be more likely to say that they prefer flowers. So between robots and humans, robots were more likely within this row to prefer flowers, whereas humans were more likely to say they preferred data. They fairly equally preferred puppies. So this is me looking at within row to look at how within row they differed in their preference. So that's one way we can write that up that I think makes sense here. So if I were trying to figure out, if somebody is a robot or if it's a human, I might be able to figure out more likely if they're a robot if they actually say they prefer flowers. But if they say data, then I would probably be more likely to say that must be a human, which is interesting. So it just gives us some diagnostics that we could use to determine whether our participant is a robot or a human. I provided a couple options of visualizations you might use because the one we have here, let's just try it out. Let's go back to our descriptives and our plots. The problem here is that it's just going to split it, and that's not what we want. So we could try this and split by. This is much better, but I like to directly label. So I actually exported this data, put it into, I exported specifically the frequencies table right here, and I put this into Excel. So these are 2 Excel plots that I made. One, this is a clustered column chart, and this is a stacked bar chart with connected lines. So we see that humans were more likely to prefer data, robots were more likely to prefer flowers. Same here, we can see here, humans more likely to prefer data, robots more likely to prefer flowers, and pretty equal on the puppies. Okay. So lastly, in case of violated assumptions, I was mentioning, let's go back to our here, that you have some other tests that you can perform. I think they've actually added more since I created this in the first place, but one of them is Fisher's exact test, and I'll just check it right now. Fisher's exact test will adjust the p-value if you violate the assumption of the expected frequencies being sufficiently large. So you can perform that, and it'll just adjust your p-value. Your chi-square will stay the same. You just want to mention that you did Fisher's exact test. So you've got some other options. I give some information about some of the other options that you have here, Kendall's tau b, gamma, and so on, if you have ordinal variables. One day I will go over all these, but just suffice to know that you probably don't need that. This is probably sufficient for you to do majority of the work that you're doing. Oh, this might be new. Ooh, they have plots now. Ooh, let's check these out. Oh, so that's about what we had before. This was the in the descriptives, and now they provide this. That is nice. So we can do side by side, or we can do stacked. Wow, that's almost exactly how I wanted it. Oh, and you can switch it. Columns. So that's how I had it before, right? Wow. You can do it by count. You can also do it by percentages of the total, or percentage within column. So there we go. Now it's 100% stacked bar chart. Oh, this is nice. Okay. When I originally recorded this when I originally did this, Jamovi was in like 1.87. They did a big update over the summer. This is exciting. Cool. So these are really good visualizations that you can use. You can play around with it to find the one that makes most sense for the way that you're reporting all this. Notice that they give you a lot of options because the default may not be exactly what you want. You can try it out and see which one you like better. Like, oh, I like that. I wish they directly labeled. I like to directly label instead of like, okay, what is that number? Oh, let's go over here. Okay, it's like 22 or something. Or having to go back to over here and find out that it's, what is it? No, sorry. Yeah, 25? Like, what is the number? Oh, because I did percentages, counts, right? About 42. And I find out, oh no, it's actually 44, right? Like, it's a little hard to like read all of that. So I like to directly label. We'll learn more about that when we talk about data visualization. But there you go. That is the test of independence.